Hello, everyone. Today we're going to be talking about the Chariot. And here we have in front of us is the Kabbalistic tree. Now, the Chariot is assigned to the path between Binah and Gibora, which is the cosmic mother, and basically the Mars force of um, the Hermetic Kabbalah. So it's between the Cosmic Mother and the powers of severity. So the Cosmic Mother is assigned to Saturn, and the path between Saturn and Mars is completely feminine. So if we think about Saturn, it's a constrictive force. It also is what gives birth to form, and Mars is the force that basically represents reproduction. So when we think about reproduction, it is a baby is piecing apart from the father and the mother, and it's a fraction of what the father and mother were at one point. So what we have here actually is the representation of the mother giving birth to everything else, every single person in the world. I mean, we all come from one maternal substance initially, and the path here that is being intimated is the cosmic mother basically giving birth to the reproductive force that keeps everything moving forward. So the letter assigned to the Chariot is Chet or Chaith, or there's a few different pronunciations, but Chet, Chaith, or Het is another pronunciation of this letter, and it means the fence. Now, if we think about it, we all are enclosed in a fleshy fence. Like our skin is a fence keeping our boundary of existence inside of our bodies. So our bodies is like a fence for our soul or for our spiritual self, kind of encapsulating our spirit inside of a fence, inside of a field. So another definition of this letter is the field. So if we put them together, the fence encloses the field. Now our bodies are the field of operation that our souls work through, and the fence is the exterior part. So there's a lot we can really get into with this, but just to keep it simple for us, that's a really basic interpretation that, I think basically all of us can understand. So here we have the letter Het, and up here we have the astrological sign of Cancer. Now, the moon rules Cancer, and Jupiter is exalted in Cancer. So the moon, as we can remember, represents periodicity, intuitive skill, psychic skill. The moon is also associated to the high priestess, so we can really establish some connections between subconscious nature here and ultimately our emotional selves. Now, on the tree of life, emotion and desire sits at Netzach, which is ruled by the Venus power. So on the tree of life, Netzach represents emotion. Okay, so this card has a lot to do with emotion. But what's interesting is that the sephira of emotion actually sits above the sphere of intellect. And the reason is because emotion is actually a spiritual sense. We can describe thoughts and ideas with words, but unless you have actually experienced a emotion, it is literally almost impossible to describe. So it's really important to understand that we as humans have evolved to understand emotions at a very high vibratory level that animals necessarily don't have. So there's a difference between knowing that there is a God and feeling that there is a God or spiritual force behind everything. And when we can all know, but once we actually feel it, the words are just, you cannot describe it. You can't describe being happy without using the word happy or joy or feeling good. You know, it's nearly impossible. So that is why Netzach sits above intellect, or emotion sits above intellect in a spiritual sense, looking at the Kabbalistic tree. And the reason that I'm bringing that up is because this sphere, Netzach, is actually the seventh sphere, and the Chariot is number 7 in the tarot. So that's where I'm drawing all these connections from. And the Chariot is a watery substance. It's assigned alchemically to water, and it's the intelligence of house of influence. And other attributions are receptivity, will, and speech. So when we use our emotions, we're actually influencing others. We can try to influence others intellectually, but once we really start to, pull their heartstrings and talk to them on an emotional level, saying this is how I feel, it's a lot more people are receptive to it. Okay, so that is that. There's more there, but we're just gonna move on. So here's the actual Rider-Waite Chariot card, and we're just gonna talk about a couple things as usual. So the first thing I'd like to bring up is the starry canopy. Now, the starry canopy represents the influence of the limitless and astral light in our world. And basically, the Chariot represents a moving house. And houses have boundaries, just like fences. So, what the starry canopy is saying, or, insinuating, is that essentially we are under the shroud of the astral light and of the limitless substance, or the limitless light. And our bodies, our vessels, our chariots are creations of that substance. So there's a reason it's at the top, because it's influencing downward. When something's at the top of something, it's always influencing downward in spiritual activity. And even when we win competitions or get good grades, the top is influencing downward. Okay, so the canopy is influencing the charioteer. Next detail I'd like to point out, and this is a lot of people ask me this question: what do the sphinxes represent? So the sphinxes represent leaving our adventure and our pursuits of life to the higher self. Now, this interpretation is kind of okay, but there's another one that I like even better. The sphinxes also represent riddles. Now, why would they represent riddles? Because all around us in our material world, the universe and the spiritual realm leaves small traces of truth for us to decipher, like riddles to our reality. And the sphinxes are pulling the chariot forward with its riddles of spiritual reality and spiritual truth. So the charioteer is constantly being pulled forward and constantly following this path of archaic communication from the realms and the dimensions beyond. So that's essentially what the sphinxes represent. Okay, moving on. Now here we have the Paul Foster case deck. Another detail I'd like to point out is the cypress trees in the background. That represents the powers of the Empress, because in the Empress card we had all the trees, very beautifully done there. One more thing I'll point out for you guys is this top looking thing. It represents vertical and horizontal forces meeting as one. Okay. So next we have the Aleister Crowley card. And here we actually have the some zodiac signs: Taurus, Scorpio, Aquarius, and I believe Leo. I think so. Now these signs are, oh, they're not the cardinal signs, but they're the ones in the middle. I need to get the right word anyway. We're going to move on. Yeah, they are basically, I think they're the mutable signs. I'm not quite sure, but they're the ones in the middle. So every single astrological category or elemental category, so there's fire, water, air, earth. Each one has a cardinal sign, which is the strongest aspect of that element, of that, fire, water, air element. There's a sign in the middle, which is basically like the middle ground for that elemental energy. And then there's a sign at the very end, which is the passive part of that elemental energy that can swing kind of in different elemental paths. So there's only one more detail I want to point out here, and it's the center. And the center is said to be of amethyst. And amethyst is assigned to the powers of Jupiter. But what's actually in the center is the Holy Grail. Now, the Holy Grail represents basically Jesus turning water into wine, and supposedly it collected Jesus's blood when he was hanging on the on the cross, when he was being crucified. So, remember earlier in the video when I told you that essentially Binah, or the cosmic mother, was giving birth and reproducing herself? Well, Binah acted on the powers of water and produced the wine of life, the blood of life. Wine is traditionally red. When we go to get our communion in Catholic Church, it is red. And it represents essentially the cosmic powers of the spiritual forces giving birth to cosmic energy, which ultimately gave birth to our blood, which is actively keeping us alive in our fence of flesh, in our body that is encapsulated by, the fleshy substance of skin. Okay, next we're going to look at the Manly P. Hall deck. There's really not much here that I need to point out. It's just kind of reaffirming everything we've already really talked about. I do want you to notice here that it's a clear background. I kind of appreciate that because, the dark womb of Binah is just endless darkness. There is no knowing where it really came from. So I do appreciate that small detail in this deck. Next, we're going to look at the Thomson-Lang Tarot. This one is kind of lacking a little bit of symbolism. This Sphinx is somewhat looking over at this one. We can also draw the pillars of the tree, the pillars of mercy and severity. Mercy is looking over at the severity pillar. This is mercy. This is severity. And that makes a lot of sense for this path on the Tree of Life. Okay, now we're going to move into the more historical cards. Here we have the Marseille Tarot, and I believe this copy was printed in 1804. This is a facsimile. This isn't a original, but this is a copy of it. What I'll talk to you about on this one is the 4 pillars, and the 4 pillars represent the 4 elements descending from the cosmic and spiritual realm. Oh, and traditionally, this card was depicted as being pulled by horses. Now, the reason that they switched it around to sphinxes is because of the evolution of the tarot and just the never-ending cycle of things being changed within the tarot's spiritual system. So, last but certainly not least, this is the Visconti Yale deck, Visconti Forza Yale deck. And if you truly look at this card, it tells you everything from the Rider-Waite card. And I'll show you how. I'll show you. So up here we actually have the starry sky. It's still there. Even, 700 years ago, or, 600 years ago, when the tarot first came to public eye, it could have existed before that. there was still the starry sky. It was still intimating that our vessels are being pulled by cosmic forces, by spiritual and cosmic forces. Okay. Now, another point I'd like to point out here is this bird of fire, this phoenix. I mean, that just represents the birth and rebirth, the recycling of everything. And it makes sense because a big part of this card is actually the wheel, and the wheels turn, and then the rung eventually hits hits its beginning point again, and everything is just rotating. It's recycling itself. Okay, energy is never destroyed nor created; it's just recycled. Okay. So there is one thing that is quite a mystery to me, and it's what this guy is doing over in the corner. If anybody knows, give a shout out. I'd love to know. But anyway, that's the short video on the Chariot today, and I hope you enjoyed it. Bye.